All over London, gay men are getting ready to turn in. They and their lovers might just be staying up to watch this programme. But here in the West End, Heaven, the largest gay disco in Europe, is still packing them in. For Heaven is a place where you can find a partner just for the night. And for many of the men who come here, that kind of casual sex is an important part of their lives.
How many people a month would you think you have it off with, probably on average?
Oh God, can I brag?
Be honest.
No, be honest. It probably works out about a couple a week, or maybe 3 a week. Or if it's a bank holiday, you know, maybe 4.
Supposedly, the average straight person only has sex with 9 people in a lifetime. Do you think you've beaten that record? And if so, how many people do you think you do have sex with a year? Say?
Well, I probably multiply it by 10, 20.
I feel as though casual sex is the best way of going about anything. For the simple fact, you're exploring all the time, you're finding out what you want, and you learn a lot more than just sticking with one person.
It just averages itself out to, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 people a month. My God, think of that in a year.
Well, how many is that in a lifetime?
It's a hell of a lot of fun.
At Heaven, the management like to encourage shopping around. They even have 2 stores on the premises to help set the right tone.
We've got shorts, shirts, jock straps, cards, reading material like magazines, gay magazines, which include nudes, as you know, gay news, which is full of information, guides for all over the world, things to keep themselves healthy, books on looking good, feeling good, eating healthy. That's basically what this shop is.
Now you've got another shop. What does that shop sell?
The other shop is Frisco Leathers, which sells leather gear for the guys that are into leather. Jackets, shirts, pants, all of those type of things.
Now, the people who come here, I mean, what do they come here for mainly? Why do they come, do you think?
They come to have a good time, whatever way that is. I mean, however they feel they want to have a good time. Most of them come to dance, to release that energy. To drink, to cruise, to meet people. That's basically it.
In Heaven, you can at least buy a drink and get to know each other's names. But there are plenty of places, like Hampstead Heath and Clapham Common, where gay men can dispense with even these preliminaries to sex.
I don't think the idea of going to Hampstead Heath and picking somebody up and having sex with them there is the same as coming to a club and picking somebody up. When you come to a club, you're probably hoping that you're going to meet somebody who you'll like to have sex with, but you'll enjoy their company as well. If you go to Hampstead Heath, you go for one reason, and you go for sex, and it happens there and it happens then. And that's kind of verging on the mindless sex that one finds in the back rooms of New York.
I think it's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, I always use the word mindless sex, and it sounds derogatory. I don't really mean it to be derogatory. It's mindless because there is no relationship involved whatsoever. It's a purely physical thing. And I think it's therapeutic.
Well, it's funny, you know, you can pick anybody in the most peculiar places. I mean, I live at Clapham Junction, so, I mean, getting on the train from Clapham Junction to Victoria can be absolutely amazing, you know, what you can do in 12 minutes, because I've timed it. You can have a ball in 12 minutes. I mean, it's anywhere. It's like, I got a friend who I nicknamed David Tesco, because I picked him up in Tesco's at the Coop Meeks, you know, so, I mean, you just meet people anywhere.
It's not just the men in heaven who cruise for casual sex, it's worldwide. Research done in America shows that over half the gay men interviewed have had between 50 and literally thousands of sexual partners during their lives. And 2 out of 3 of those gay men said that at least half their sexual partners were complete strangers. But the gay men who come here don't see this as something shocking that they ought to apologise for.
Well, I think casual sex is a good thing. I don't think it's dehumanising. It certainly can be, but I don't think in the sense that gay people use casual sex that it is dehumanising.
Gays are a lot more adventurous than straights, and they'll try anything, and there's a lot more feeling into it. Not necessarily love, but more feeling.
I mean, basically, that's what we come out for. We come out to enjoy ourselves. And I think the finest compliment you can pay anybody if you're going to pick somebody up is stay at the moment's crew.
Of course, this is by no means true of all gay people. The majority probably form long-term relationships in which sex is an expression of love for their partner. Nonetheless, the evidence does suggest that more gay men have sex more often and with more partners than is true either for straights or for lesbians. Why this is, and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, are issues which are constantly debated by gay people themselves. And it's these questions which we'll be trying to answer in tonight's programme.
Those on the scene think they know why so many gay men are into casual sex. It's just because they're men. They say all men would if they could.
I don't think gay men have a different attitude to sex than straight men. I say that because I think men generally have a similar attitude to sex, but what happens is that the conventions that are placed on straight men by society alter their view of sex. But I think at the back of everybody's head, sex is much the same thing throughout.
I think gay men and straight men presumably brought up roughly the same kind of way. I think it's important to gay men. Gay men perhaps have more opportunity. They're not as hidebound by the conventions of married life of straight people. So the opportunities presents itself a lot more.
The idea that gay men are simply doing what most men would like to do probably has some truth in it. Research does show that men generally are more preoccupied with sex. We don't know why this is. It may be inborn, or it might just be because society tolerates it more in men. But whatever the reason, the fact that they're men doesn't explain gays' attitudes completely. For there are factors particular to the gay scene that may make sex more important for them than it would be for even the most unrestrained heterosexual. These factors reach back into history. John Alcock was growing up in the 1930s, when the world of the modern gay man was still being shaped. And there were 2 things about that time which accentuated the male interest in casual sex. The first was that homosexuality was condemned. The sheer weight of public hostility meant that open, emotionally satisfying gay relationships were much more difficult than today.
Well, of course, the society was very hostile, and it was not easy to form long-lasting relationships at all. One would go to public lavatories, cottages, or you would cruise actually in an area like this. It was very popular in those days. Or to remote places, parks and places like that. It was in no way as easy and as much more pleasant as it is today, in actual fact.
In Hyde Park, it was Speaker's Corner near Marble Arch that was the main cruising area.
So you get enormous crowds of people milling around here and then actually standing still. As a matter of fact, even if there was nobody doing any talking, you'd still see large groups of people standing here, all gathered together and very, very close together. And of course, they would make advances by touching one another. And in fact, the crowds were so dense and so closely knit in this area, you could actually have sex actually standing there, you know, and you could get yourself into all kinds of pleasant interest in situations.
Necessarily furtive gay encounters, like those here at Speaker's Corner, naturally discouraged people from getting emotionally involved. And there was another factor which made love more difficult. In those days, gay men tended to divide their world into other gays, whom they thought of as sisters and with whom they were friends, and real men with whom they had sex.
Gay people sleeping with other gay people actually was a little bit frowned on when I was young. They actually referred to it as Tootsie trade. They liked to go with what they assumed was a butch type of an image of a man. And indeed, that was the end of which they pursued.
Can you tell us what people meant when they talked about rough trade?
Like riding high in the saddle. The Clint Eastwood kind of image was regarded as rough trade. Builders, labourers, the type of men that put their shoulders before the rest of their body came following them along. That's rough, dirty, broken shirts, torn shirts, that type of thing.
This interest in real men made it very difficult for gays to find sex and love in the same relationship. Real men were for the most part straight, and the thought of falling in love with another man would probably never have crossed their minds. This set a pattern for gay relationships that was to survive for the next 40 years. But in 1970, it did look as if this might change. Reforms in the law and gay liberation meant that gays were no longer confined to furtive encounters. At the same time, the sexual revolution was attacking traditional concepts of what were supposed to be real men. And this helped to free them from the notion that only straights were attractive. It turned them on to their gay sisters, who turned out to be real men too. The three men who run the Gay Men's Press were among many who hoped that these changes would lead gay men to link sex and relationships in an entirely new way.
We certainly were very much against what was defined as the gay pubs and clubs scene and the kinds of lifestyle that gay men lived in that context. The straight society offers you the possibility of casual sex of a fairly anonymous and promiscuous kind that after a certain point doesn't really satisfy people's real needs. And our idea was very much that a flowing network of loving relationships, you could say, which often in actual sort of terms of organisation meant some kind of living together situation, a commune where people, a group of adults lived on an equal basis, with sex being one part, one strand in their general sort of interpersonal relationship. We saw this as providing a kind of richer and more fulfilling way of life than either monogamy or promiscuity could.
All very challenging, but it didn't work. Rather than settling into loving communes, as gay liberationists had hoped, gay men came out cruising on an unprecedented scale. Today, gay men have casual sex in more places and more openly than ever before. In fact, sex has become a full-scale gay industry. Oli Frey is 33. He started work as a children's illustrator, but quickly graduated to gay erotic art. He now co-publishes the nudie magazine Him, and has created a comic strip character for it called Rogue. Rogue has rapidly become a cult figure amongst gay men.
Well, Rogue is this big butch man, exaggeratedly butch, who used to do nothing but walk around and find humpy youngsters whom he manages to lay one way or the other. I created him 5 years ago And for some reason or other, he's become very popular, I think mainly because he's very simple.
Rogue is the cruiser incarnate. His mouth-watering exploits take him from lonely country lanes to Hampstead Heath and even somewhere deep in space. Rogue's popularity mirrors the growth of gay sexual freedom.
The people who used to buy him magazine, I think, were the older age group, around about 50 years of age. In the last 2 years, I think our readership has become younger and younger. In fact, we even have underage people reading our magazine. And I think that whereas the magazine used to be something for the Macintosh Brigade, it has now become something that is a part of just everyday gay life for lots of people. They buy it every month as if they'd buy any other glossy. And I don't think a lot of them hide it away in their cupboards. So I think it just shows a greater awareness of one's sexuality and of living it openly.
So why have gay men opted for more sex rather than more love, as gay liberationists had hoped? Oli Frey believes it's because things haven't changed nearly as much as people at first thought. Society's hostility, for instance, still hasn't abated enough to make open gay emotional involvements very practical.
I think it could be better in Britain for people to form relationships if one weren't forced to hide it all the time and explain it away to landlords, friends, well, friends obviously not, but neighbours. I think it's difficult enough forming a relationship without having to hide it as well. I think that's one area which I feel could be bettered, and possibly if more people learn to accept that gay men aren't any different to themselves, really, and don't desperately want to sort of parade their sexuality in front of them and just let them get on with it. I think possibly being gay could be quite a normal lifestyle.
What's more, although gays have abandoned the old idea that they are effeminates in search of real men, they've replaced it with another stereotype, which doesn't really bring sex and emotion any closer. Many gay men now feel that they have to live up to a new butch image by proving that they're as good a stud as the next man.
I think people tend to feel that what else is there to do there apart from drink and try and find someone for the night? My feeling is a little bit magazines like him tend to obviously force people into that position even more, where all that is portrayed is sex. And people start worrying, am I as much a man as all the ones portrayed in these various magazines? I think some people must be prone to feeling inferior if they can't cope, which is rather sad. It's a pity there aren't areas where gay men could sort of enjoy their leisure and feel they are being gay, where there isn't this hidden pressure to be some sexual athlete all the time.
So it seems that for the moment, casual sex still rules in the male gay world. But is this a good thing or a bad thing? We'll be back in just a moment. John Hart is a lecturer in social administration. He's been gay for 10 years, and during that time has done the gay scene pretty thoroughly. On the whole, he's found it a disagreeable experience. For a start, he feels that cruising as a lifestyle leads gay men to ape what he sees as the worst qualities of straight men: extreme competitiveness and aggression.
Gay men could well be offering alternative ways of being a man. At the moment they're offering mere caricatures of this by the emphasis on kind of heavy leather and macho and that particular style. So they're doing nothing really to challenge the social structures that we have. They are, in fact, reinforcing the view that men are men, and this means masculinity, lack of emotion, competitiveness, aggression, casual sex, and sex split off from the rest of your life. And these elements, I think, we know are not good for people, just as we know that it isn't very good to be a traditional woman, that one has to find other ways of fulfilling oneself other than a particular role. The irony is that gay men are taking on the male role, which is probably as bad for their health as the traditional women's role for women.
What's more, he thinks that a life of casual sex makes it very difficult for gay men to form relationships.
If you're devoting yourself to casual sex with men, you're actually not going to get to know people well and to get your feet wet in terms of relationships and all the pain that involves. So my concern is that people don't get the practice, so that by the time that they're off the cruising scene, they have very few skills in the area of relationships, and indeed may be very depressed about their ability to make deeper relationships with people.
And finally, John shares what must be the biggest fear for many gay men. If your life is devoted to casual sex, what happens when you start getting older and losing your looks?
Cruising is elitist in that it's going to apply and be successful for a relatively small number of men, in that you've got to be the right age, you've got to have the right equipment, that is, you've got to have a 9-inch cock and biceps and moustache and whatever happens to be fashionable. And the thing is that not all of us are going to have that for all of our lives. The consequences are that people feel that they are an inadequate commodity. It's very much about the marketplace, where people presumably are free to go out and choose what they want that particular night and be chosen. Of course, as time goes by, people won't be chosen so often, and this, I think, is very bad for people's self-image, because you're evaluating yourself as an object, as an item, and therefore you are going to have a bad impression of yourself if the goods aren't wanted any longer. And if your life has been centred around this aspect of gay male sexuality, then this is going to result in a lot of feelings of loss later on, and loss, as we know, is very much connected with depression.
The fears expressed by John Hart are ones that many gay men share. And certainly the straight world has a stereotype of gay men as being neurotic and unfulfilled. But the best evidence we have, a comprehensive survey of gay men conducted by the Kinsey Institute in America, tended to contradict this view. They did find that a slightly larger proportion of gay, as opposed to straight men, said that they were very unhappy or not too happy. But against this, the overwhelming majority of gay men were as happy or even happier than the straight men. They were more likely, for instance, to say that their lives had improved over the previous 5 years, and they had a wider and a closer circle of friends. So why is the reality so at odds with what some gay men themselves fear? Well, the truth seems to be that those gay men who are into casual sex find emotional fulfillment to much the same extent as everyone else in society. They simply achieve it differently.
John Shears was once involved in gay liberation. He too was against casual sex because he saw it as competitive and aggressive. But he now thinks that analogies with straight men picking up women are wrong. Gay men, he feels, are much more equal through the common experience of being gay.
I think that in heterosexual culture, the culture that we're all brought up in, the culture that we all learn to accept is the norm, and the culture that I think gay people define themselves against, the idea that casual sexual encounters, A, are easy, and B, are fun, is a very difficult one, because the experience of heterosexual casual sex is not one of it being easy or fun, certainly not easy for women, and certainly not fun for women, and I suspect not easy or fun either for a lot of the men who swagger and boast a lot about how much they're into it. Now, on the gay scene, that is all very different, because gay men begin at the point of relating to one another as equals. However much there are differences, class differences, cultural differences, lifestyle differences, there's one thing that we have in common, and that thing we have in common is the fact that we're men who are attracted to other men in a society that denies the validity of that attraction.
Simon Watney is 32 and a lecturer in art history. His life story challenges the second objection to casual sex, that it makes emotional fulfillment impossible. Simon admits that when he first came onto the gay scene 13 years ago, he was unhappy, largely because he was trying mistakenly to create the gay equivalent of a heterosexual marriage.
I entered onto the gay scene in a state of chronic insecurity and anxiety and guilt. I went through a lot of quite painful experiences provided emotionally for me by the ambient culture I live in, you know, romantic love, the dreams of Mr. Right and so on and so forth. When I started out in the gay scene, I had a number of brief encounters with different people, and then I met someone whom I lived with for 5 years, and I attempted to establish with him an idyllic, happy ever after, romantic, one-to-one relationship. And it was probably absolutely necessary for me to do that at that stage in my life, but I learnt out of the experience, which was extremely painful, of course, when it ended, a great deal about myself, about where my desires came from, what my fears were, my own anxieties. And to some extent, I've repeated the mistakes with different people again and again, but you can't go on making mistakes. You do actually learn from them in the end.
Simon came to feel after a while that although casual sex might not result in any marriage of minds, that didn't make it the dreadful thing that most people supposed.
I think it's very dangerous to think of casual sex in some terms of some sort of hierarchy of social activities, as if casual sex was at the bottom and it was what you did if you couldn't do anything else. You know, the picture of the pitiful gay man sort of crawling out and sort of rushing home for rather ghastly, sordid casual sex and then kicking them out at night. I remember the first time I ever went to a gay club when I was about 17, I think, 16 or 17. I heard two much older men talking to me, and one said to the other, "Oh, this bloke came back last night and I couldn't get him to go." And I thought, my God, that's the most cynical thing I've ever heard in my life. But actually, I mean, life can be like that. You can meet someone, go to bed with them, and they turned out to be, you know, people you're not going to get, someone you're not going to get on with. The point that I'd want to make, however, is that casual sex is one part of a whole spectrum of different kinds of social relations. It's not to be prioritised, it's not to be necessarily put down. It stands in relation to different sorts of friendships, different sorts of sexual friendships. It's a part of one's life. It's not something which is desperately significant in itself. Indeed, most gay men are going to feel quite self-conscious talking about casual sex as a category, precisely because it's something which is so dissolved into the fabric of their lives.
But most importantly, Simon began to realise that his sexual experiences actually were providing him with longer-term emotional fulfilment, though not quite in the way that he'd expected. His lovers might not turn into lifelong partners, but they would, and did, turn into very close friends. Gregory Hayman is one of his friends. He and Simon had an affair 2 years ago.
The relationship that I had with Gregory a couple of years ago was, in a sense, wildly unlikely. I tend to have relationships with people basically my own age, and Gregory was 10 years younger than myself. We just happened to meet one ghastly, rainy, typical August night in Brighton in a pub, and there was he and there was I, and that was it. I would never have, I think, gone out across a disco to try and, as it were, pick up or introduce myself to someone like Gregory, because by and large I'm a bit cautious about relationships which are with people a lot younger than myself. But in fact it was a really rewarding relationship for me, and I think in many ways it was for Gregory, and we're now very, very close, loving friends. I can't see anything affecting that.
Simon's bonds of friendship extend even to Richard Muddett, Gregory's new lover. It's through these relationships with lovers and other people that Simon thinks gay men achieve emotional support and fulfillment.
I don't for a moment want to suggest that gay people have everything worked out. Every relationship that's had any meaning to anyone which goes wrong is going to be painful. It's going to be extremely painful. I'm not for a moment imagining that gays are in some sense immune to pain, immune to jealousy, immune to all those emotions which are, as it were, so central in our culture for constructing the kind of individual people our society depends upon. But in a sense, gay people do have at least the possibility to work out their own feelings, to work out their own shortcomings, in a sense, collectively, in the gay scene and through the gay scene, and through a variety of different sorts of sexual and social relations, which are not necessarily easily available to young heterosexual contemporaries of theirs.
Of course, many people would argue that it's easy for Simon Watney to feel satisfied. After all, he's still young and adaptable. But what happens when people like him get older, when they're no longer so attractive? How do they feel about being sexually rejected? And are their ex-lovers and friends going to be enough to fill their lives? Roger Baker is 46. Ironically, perhaps, he's the editor of the straight sex magazine Forum. He believes that sexual fulfillment isn't a question of age, it's a question of attitude.
I began to realize that I was getting into a state of mind where I thought there were certain ages at which you stopped doing certain things. And I began to realize this was so much nonsense. There isn't an age when you stop going to rock concerts, or you stop wearing jeans, or you stop eating ice cream in the street, or whatever. And I decided that as long as I wanted to and was physically able to do all the things I already had been doing, but with more enjoyment, I was going to continue to do them. And what other people thought, well, that was their problem, not mine. And as far as I'm concerned, my life's been like 3 million times better since I was 34 than it was before I was 34.
But getting casual sex when you're older does involve compromises, like no longer hankering after pretty young things. Roger feels he's lucky that his taste has always been for men of his own age.
I've never found any shortage of sexual partners, and do not expect to find any shortage of sexual partners. Mind you, I'd better add as a rider to that I personally am not particularly attracted to young people. I don't mean very young people. I generally say that I really can't relate to anyone under 30, which is a generalization, but there's a lot of truth in that. I've always liked men of my own age group.
What's more, when Roger meets new lovers now, he's more interested in developing these relationships than he used to be.
I used to have a lot of one-night stands, literally that, and I used to go into the relationship with an awareness in my mind that I was not going to see the guy again after the following morning. There was no good reason for me to do that at all. It was just some kind of, this is the way it is-ness. I began to realize that this was ridiculous.
Roger Baker realizes that as he grows older, even this may offer less and less. But he feels that his old age will certainly be no more deprived than old age is for people generally. In fact, he finds that gays who come to old age with a wider network of friends may even be better off than straights, in some respects at least.
One thing people often say is about being gay, and they say to you, oh, it's all right now when you're young, but when you're old you're going to be very lonely, aren't you? Well, nobody can say what they're going to be in 20, 30, 40 years at all, so that's a ridiculous project anyway. But the basic assumption is that if you get married and have children, you're never going to be lonely, presumably because you're going to have all these slightly resentful adult children around who are bringing you meals on wheels and things. For a gay person who has come to terms with and accepted the fact that he or she is gay at a reasonably early age, like early 20s, is going to consciously or unconsciously become or take account of the fact that this kind of family network is just not going to exist. So one builds closer and more binding friendships with people one meets and gets to know, perhaps has lovers with, makes lovers of, and so on over the years.
Gay men whose lifestyle involves casual sex don't claim that their lives are necessarily better than other people's. But equally, they don't think that they're any worse. They believe that it all depends on what the individual makes of his life. Sex and emotion don't have to be linked in the way that the straight world traditionally does. Back here at heaven, even as they bop the night away, gay men don't easily forget that it's their friends who are their family.
You definitely need gay friends. Gay friends are very important to other gays. You can't survive without them.
What we do is, rather than get emotionally tied up with a partner, we tend to make good, strong friends. We've got people who will stand by us, and friendships last a hell of a long time on the gay scene. It's incredible.
They're the things that sort of make your daily life bearable. They give you support, and they give you... certainly I think friends are more important than sex, yes.